In the 1970s, America was producing over 200 million scrap tyres every single year, and the country had no real plan for a single one of them. They piled up in fields, caught fire, and bred mosquitoes by the millions. So when a group in Fort Lauderdale, Florida proposed a fix, it sounded like the smartest thing anyone had said in a decade. Their plan was to take 2 million of those tyres and drop them straight into the ocean, right on top of a coral reef. Wait, what? Here is the strange part, though. This was not some criminal dumping scheme. It was a government-approved project, cheered on by scientists, meant to rebuild the reef and bring marine life flooding back. And 50 years later, what divers found down there is the exact opposite of everything they were promised. I am Ambrose Wild, and this is the story of how the best intentions on Earth built a 2 million tyre graveyard at the bottom of the sea. Before we get to the tyres, you need to understand the world they landed in, because it explains why smart people thought this was fine. For most of the 20th century, the ocean was treated as a bottomless garbage can. There were no rules. If your factory made waste, the sea took it, no questions asked. In one single year in the late 1960s, the United States dumped tens of millions of tons of industrial waste, sewage sludge, and construction debris directly into coastal waters. That is not the disturbing part. Between 1946 and 1970, the US sank more than 55,000 drums of radioactive waste into the Pacific alone, and thousands more off the Atlantic coast. Some of those barrels were literally shot with rifles when they refused to sink. So when someone in 1972 said, "Let us put clean rubber tyres in the water to help fish," it genuinely sounded like an upgrade. That same year, the government finally slammed the door shut. New laws banned most ocean dumping, which suddenly left industries with mountains of waste and nowhere to hide it. And the tyre industry had the biggest mountain of all. Basic tyre recycling barely existed, so nearly every worn tyre went to a landfill or an incinerator. Therefore, when a non-profit called Broward Artificial Reef proposed killing two problems with one idea, the whole city listened. Clear the tyre piles off the land and rebuild the dying reef offshore. On paper, it was beautiful. Now, the science behind it was not crazy, and this is the part most retellings skip. Coral reefs cover less than 1% of the ocean floor, yet they shelter roughly a quarter of all marine species. A healthy reef is essentially an underwater apartment complex. The theory was simple. Coral larvae drift freely in the water and need a hard surface to attach to. Give them more surface area and you get more coral. More coral pulls in more fish, and therefore you have bootstrapped a brand new ecosystem from garbage. And it was not a wild guess either. Artificial reefs made from sunken ships and concrete had genuinely worked in other places, so the logic held together. The problem was never the idea. The problem was one detail nobody thought hard enough about. The project got the green light in 1974, and Florida went all in. More than 100 private boats volunteered. Tyres were bundled together with steel clips and nylon straps, then dumped across a 36-acre patch of seabed about a mile offshore. It became a full civic event. Goodyear, the tyre giant, got so involved they dropped a gold-painted tyre from a blimp to christen the site. In total, roughly 2 million tyres went into the water, creating what they proudly named the Osborne Reef. Picture that for a second. 100 boats raining rubber into the Atlantic while a blimp floats overhead. They thought they were building a monument. Here is where it all comes apart. Remember those steel clips holding the bundles together? Nobody treated them to survive saltwater. And this is the single overlooked mistake that turned a reef into a wrecking ball. Here is the chemistry quickly. Steel rusts when moisture pulls electrons away from the iron inside it. In salt water, that reaction runs several times faster because salt is packed with dissolved ions that carry electric charge, and rust is fundamentally an electrical process. The saltier the water, the faster the metal dies. So untreated steel at the bottom of the ocean is not a binding, it is a countdown. Within just a few years, the clips corroded and snapped, and all 2 million tires came loose. Therefore, instead of a solid reef, Florida now had 2 million untethered rubber projectiles sitting in one of the most hurricane-prone stretches of coastline on the planet. And you can guess what the storms did. Year after year, powerful currents lifted the loose tires and hurled them across the seabed like a slow-motion avalanche. They battered the natural reef that was already living nearby, grinding decades of real coral growth into rubble. Read that again. A project built to grow coral was now the machine actively destroying it. The tires did not just fail to make a new reef, they murdered the old one. But the damage refused to stay in Florida. When major hurricanes tore through the region, they scattered tires far beyond the drop site. Storms flung them onto beaches hundreds of miles away, washing up as far north as the Carolinas. Local governments who had nothing to do with the project were suddenly pulling Osborne tires off their own shorelines. And here is the biological insult on top of the mess. A moving tire cannot grow anything. Coral needs still, clean, warm water and years of stability to take hold. A tire that gets thrown 900 miles up the coast in a storm is never going to host a single polyp. So the reef failed twice over. It destroyed existing life and grew nothing new. By the early 2000s, everyone finally admitted the obvious, and the cleanup began. And this is where the numbers start to hurt. The first real effort, run by university researchers on a modest grant, recovered around 1,600 tires. Divers had to swim down, wrestle each waterlogged tire free by hand, and haul it up. The estimated cost to remove the whole thing landed somewhere between $40 and $100 million. So progress stalled until the US military stepped in and started using the site as a live salvage training ground, pulling up tens of thousands of tires as practice. Between military divers and later a specialized contractor, crews eventually clawed back a few 100,000 tires over more than a decade. Impressive until you remember what they started with, because even after all of that, well over 1 million tires still sat on the sea floor. If you are finding this story as strange as I did, take a second to subscribe, because I dig up these forgotten disasters every single week. Now let us get to the part that genuinely bothers me. In recent years, a private ocean cleanup company took over a section of the site, funding the work partly by selling bracelets made from recycled ocean plastic and rubber. And they have made real progress, which I want to be fair about. But run the math and something uncomfortable falls out. That original university cleanup cost roughly $17 per tire. When you work out the cost per tire under the bracelet-funded model, it comes out many times higher. Now, prices rise over 20 years, and a company has real expenses a university grant does not. But it raises a genuinely thorny question, and I want your honest take in the comments. Can we criticize a company for profiting while doing environmental good? Or is that just moving the goalposts? Here is the part that actually keeps me up. Where is Goodyear in all of this? The company that gleefully dropped a golden tire from a blimp to celebrate has quietly vanished from the story. They were thrilled to get their branded tires out of ugly, bad press landfills and hidden under the waves where nobody could see them. Out of sight, out of mind, out of the annual report. And that leads to a genuinely dark possibility. If cleaning up pollution becomes profitable enough, the very companies that create the mess have every incentive to keep creating it, because fixing it pays. That is a system that quietly rewards pollution. I am not accusing anyone specific of that, but once you see the shape of it, you cannot unsee it. And before you think Osborne was a one-off, it absolutely was not. In the 1980s, authorities on the French Riviera sank around 25,000 tyres off the coast between Cannes and Antibes, believing the exact same thing, that the rubber was harmless and would nurture life. By the mid-2000s, researchers discovered the tyres had been quietly leaching heavy metals and toxic compounds into the water the entire time. France launched a cleanup, with the tyre maker Michelin helping foot the bill. And here is the twist that stings. The French removed their tyres for a fraction of Florida's cost per tyre. Same mistake, wildly different competence. Then there is the Reef made of people. Off Key Biscayne, Florida, there is an artificial reef where human cremated remains are mixed into pH-neutral concrete and sculpted into memorials. An underwater city of the dead, complete with roads and archways. It actually works as a reef, drawing over 100 marine species. But the cheapest placement runs $13,000 and climbs to $85,000. And cremation plus concrete production both pump enormous amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So a project sold as green burial carries a very heavy carbon footprint, and it is priced so only the wealthy can afford to become a reef. There is even a retired aircraft carrier, the Oriskany, deliberately sunk off Florida with 500 pounds of explosives to become a dive site. It is genuinely popular with divers. It also went down still carrying hundreds of pounds of banned cancer-causing chemicals in its wiring and insulation. And that is the pattern hiding underneath every one of these stories. Someone has a mountain of something expensive to get rid of: spare tires, waste concrete, an entire warship. And instead of the hard, costly work of proper disposal, they find a way to frame dumping it in the ocean as environmentalism. If the reef takes off, everyone celebrates and counts the money they saved. If it fails, like Osborne, they have already washed their hands and moved on. The ocean is the perfect crime scene because the evidence sinks. Modern marine scientists are now deeply skeptical that most artificial reefs help at all. Many do not create new fish, they just gather existing fish from healthy reefs into one spot, where fishermen promptly find them and clean them out. So here is where I land, and I would honestly love to be talked out of it. Osborne started with genuinely good intentions and became a 50-year catastrophe because of one untreated piece of steel. But the deeper lesson is not about rust. It is about what happens when getting rid of our garbage is expensive and hiding it is cheap. The scariest future is not a company that fails to clean the ocean. It is a company that realizes there is more money in the cleanup than in ever preventing the mess. I am Ambrose Wild. If forgotten disasters and the uncomfortable questions behind them are your kind of thing, stick around, because I have got a whole lot more of them coming. Until next time.